All right, so this is my grandfather, Donald Wesley Williams, just in case there's any mistake. And we are going to talk about his military experiences as he was in the Navy. And so we're just going to begin with where you began. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up, how it all started for you.
I grew up on the farm, and my dad was the second breeder of Ohio to have polled Hereford
Where was the farm at?
in central Ohio.
Okay. And so he ran, was it a big farm or
130 acres.
130 acre farm? So Paul Hereford, was he a military man? Was he in the military?
He was in a military, some type of military where he was in Ohio State, but he never got into active duty.
Okay.
It was, I think, something like an ROTC back in the
So
20s.
were you encouraged to join the military? How did you enter the military? How did all that work out?
I was, at the time I was going to go to college was the time that I was draft eligible. And I did particularly want to go to the Army on a draft. And I found out that the Navy had a program that I could go to the Navy for the same amount of time as an officer with a 2-year obligation and then come home.
And so what was the time frame that you went in?
I graduated from high school in 2051.
15, okay. And you were in ROTC?
I was in NROTC,
Okay.
N meaning Navy.
Oh, I didn't realize that was the difference. So when you entered the Navy, what did the ROTC do? How did that work?
That was a Reserve Officer Training Corps, and I was in the reserve section of it instead of the active duty. So my required duty was 2 years of reserve duty, or 2 years of active duty, and finish it out 7 years of reserve duty.
Okay.
So basically I would have been on call the rest of the time.
Okay.
I ended up spending 2 years on board ship and a year and a half on an extension. They asked if I wanted to extend when my time was up, and they gave me a type of program where I could extend for 15 months where I wanted to go. If I didn't get what I wanted to go, I didn't have to finish the time.
Okay.
So I ended up with 15 months in recruiting duty out of Cincinnati.
Okay. Is that what you asked for? Is that what you wanted to do?
Yes,
Because it was closer to home?
yes, it was 40 miles from home.
Right. So we were talking earlier, and you said you had some wants as far as where you would be stationed and what you would be doing. How did all that work out for you?
Oh, for the active duty status, they ask what type of duty you wanted and where you wanted it, and they would try to meet your request. So I requested small combatant Atlantic to be close to Ohio instead of Pacific, and auxiliary Atlantic, and I was assigned auxiliary cargo Pacific,
Pacific.
and that's all I do, cargo Pacific. And I got to San Francisco to report to active duty and had to wait for a transfer to my permanent station. So I waited in San Francisco for 2 days, saw every movie that I could see while I was waiting, because I had to check in at the federal building twice a day. And when I got my orders, I ended up in Hawaii.
In Hawaii.
I don't know where I would have ended up if I'd have requested Hawaii. So I spent 2 years on active duty on board ship stationed in Hawaii. And we made 13 trips from Hawaii to Kwajalein. One of those trips, we went to Bikini Atoll, offloaded our cargo, and were given the choice of staying tied up in port or leave that night early so we would be away from the atomic blast that they were going to have the next morning. We decided to get our butt out of there as fast as we could. So we were about 120 miles away when the underwater test went off in Kwajalein.
The atomic explosion, they
That was
detonated
Bikini.
it, or
Yeah,
Bikini,
Bikini Atoll.
they detonated it underwater.
Yeah, that was an underwater.
Was anything visible from that far away?
One big flash.
Really? Wow. Now, how far away were you when the blast?
We were probably 150 miles away.
150. So,
And that was going as fast as we could go all night. So you could tell our top speed wasn't much more than 6 knots.
how often were they detonating stuff? Oh, was that a regular occurrence down there? Or?
No, that was, I don't know how many blasts they did have, but they had some there. Part of my active duty was in Kwajalein, where one of the ships that had been used in an atomic blast had been towed down to Kwajalein and capsized in the lagoon, and that was the Prince Eugen, or Prince Eugen, which was a battle cruiser that was with the Bismarck when the Bismarck was sunk after the British sent as much Navy as they could against it.
Right. So, what was the name of your ship?
USS Sussex,
The Sussex.
AK 213.
What was life like on board the Sussex?
If you saw the movie Mr. Roberts' life on the Sussex, was just like life was on Mr. Roberts,
Really?
except for the comedy of it.
Right. So, sleeping quarters, all that, real cramped, small.
Yes, but since I was an officer, I had a stateroom,
Okay. How big was the stateroom?
probably 12 by 12.
And food on board?
Yes. We had Filipino Stuarts. It didn't have colored Stuarts, but
Yeah.
for some reason it was Filipino. And when they had the atomic test, we had to all pass certain, I can't think of the word, intelligence,
Yeah.
and they couldn't pass it, so they took on colored Stuarts just for the trip to Bikini.
Okay.
So
And you were stationed out of Pearl Harbor.
stationed out of Pearl Harbor, was there 2 years, 13 trips from Pearl Harbor to Kwajalein. And the next trip the ship took was going to Kwajalein, offloaded cargo, and spent 2 weeks in Australia. And I'd already left.
So you missed out on
So
Australia.
they scheduled the best trip after I left the ship.
What, let's see, so you would have been in Pearl Harbor what year? What year would you have ended up in Pearl Harbor?
56, 57.
Okay, and so that's what, 15 years after the Japanese bombed? 15, 16 years
Yeah,
after?
I don't know what the date was, but
1941. So what did the harbor itself look like? Was there still a lot of signs from the attack at that point, or?
no, the harbor, Kwajalein Lagoon was quite a large lagoon. And you could go around and you wouldn't see very much at all. The Prince Eugen was towed down there from the atomic test, and you could see it upside down. You saw the keel, and the props, and it was basically on a cliff, so when we did any diving around it, we dove under it and then came up through a space which was about 5 yards wide between the ship and the reef.
You talked about doing some diving in your free time, having some diving equipment.
That was there.
That was it. That's what you were doing.
Yeah.
And what were you just to see the sights? Is that what you were
just diving.
Just in your free time? Wow. Well, what was some of the best experiences that you had in your time in the Navy? Some of the more memorable moments that you had?
That was probably the most memorable because we weren't really doing anything Navy-wise then. It was all recreational. There were about 6 of us on board ship that had aqualugs, and so we were dove together.
Yeah.
The one experience I did have, the first dive we did, I was probably 4th in line, 5th in line, following a straight line, and I saw something move out of the corner of my mask, and I was afraid to look. And when I finally did look at it, it was a torpedo, setting upright, setting up on these props,
Oh, wow.
just waving in the current.
Wow.
And of course, we didn't know. We treated anything we saw like that as live torpedoes.
Right.
So we steered clear.
Didn't try to take that one home with you.
No, we didn't try to take that. But the 2 years in Quadrant, I was offered an extension of, well, they gave various times, but strangely enough, the offer was included where you wanted to go with the duty that you wanted to do, which is unheard of, really.
Mm-hmm.
So I considered it and finally decided, well, it's 15 months in the Atlantic, which would be 3/4 of a day away from my home, and with whatever duty I decided to do, and the only thing that was available to Navy in inland was recruiting duty. So I spent 1.5 years in Cincinnati in recruiting duty.
Was recruiting, did you have a quota that they wanted you to try to reach in recruiting?
You said that they wanted us to try to reach, yeah. We never reached it.
Never reached it. What,
I'm not sure in 15 months whether I've recruited anybody.
That's what I was wondering. After the war, has come to an end, what was military? Were people still signing up for the military, or had that people pretty well?
The draft had finished, so you had no threat of the draft.
Okay.
About half of what you got in the services when the draft was there
Mm-hmm.
was joining in order to get something that you wanted,
Right.
instead of being drafted and get what they gave you.
And a lot of times, if you were drafted, you would end up infantry or something like that.
You had no idea where you were going to end up.
Wow.
If you were drafted Army, you
Right.
were infantry.
Right. So, the recruiting, there wasn't a lot going on
No.
with the recruiting after the war. I can see that.
No, the biggest advantage of the program I went through, the Navy ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps, was the last 2 years in college. You got paid for being in it, $1 a day, $30 a month was your pay, and then you had signed up to do 2 years active duty.
Okay.
So you couldn't beat that deal.
Yeah.
go in as an officer,
So you went in as, what was your rank when you went in?
lieutenant junior grade,
Lieutenant junior grade. Okay.
which is the same as the second lieutenant in the Army.
Right. That's what you left the Navy as?
I left the Navy as a lieutenant,
Lieutenant, okay.
which is a first lieutenant in
Okay.
the Army.
Okay. And so you knew that you wanted to get out of the Navy? I mean, you didn't have any aspirations of lifelong military career or anything?
No, I thought about it at one time, and then I looked at the skipper that I had at the time and thought, oh, that's bad enough. I'm not going to. As soon as I'm through with him, I'm getting out of here.
So what were some of the negative experiences, or maybe harder experiences for you? What was some of the hardest things about being in the military, being in the Navy, that you remember?
I don't really remember anything, the experience that I had that was hard.
Nothing really negative.
Well, I was a farm boy, never had any experience on the water, so all of that was new, and I enjoyed it.
Did you get seasick?
No.
Never did. What about that? Okay. So, tell us a little bit about your life after you leave the military. What do you end up going on to do with your life after you get out of the Navy?
I got married.
How soon after did you get married?
In about 2 years.
2 years. And so you met my grandmother, Barbara, while you were still in the Navy, right?
I met her on spring break from Purdue.
From Purdue, okay.
She was my spring break pickup.
Oh, okay. Met her in Florida?
Met her in Florida. 6 of us piled into a pickup truck from Purdue. We had plywood sides, which we had picked up at a construction site where one of the guy's parents were building a new home.
Yeah.
So we helped ourselves to the plywood to make kind of a camper out of our pickup truck and drove straight through to Florida. And that's where I met her.
So met Barbara in Florida, married, you said 2 years?
Met her in Florida, and while I was on board ship, headed for Kwajalein, not having anything to do, I was going through my billfold and found her picture with her address on the back of it. So I wrote her a letter, and I got one right back, an answer to it. And I didn't get that answer quite fast enough. I got another one that said that she had met me, thought she had met me, etc. and so forth. So I thought, that's smart aleck. So I went to the Radio Shack and I pulled out a sheet of paper out of the Radio Shack typewriter that was probably 5 feet long. I stuck her in the typewriter, double spaced, and I started typing. And I typed that whole thing with a bunch of probably BS. But gave her my whole family history and so forth and so on. And folded it up and started to get an envelope, and then decided, no, that was too easy. Pulled it out, took a pair of scissors to it, and stuffed it back in the envelope. So I guess that was the start of it, because I hear all kinds of tales about what they had to do to put that thing together so she could read her mail.
So you get married right after you get out, right? Or was it, what'd you say, 2 years?
No, we were together 21 days over a 2-year period.
Okay. All right, so you're married, and what is it that you pursue professionally after you're out of the Navy?
I went back to the farm.
Okay.
My dad had been the second breeder in Ohio to have polled Hereford cattle. A polled Hereford is a white face with no horns. So I went back on the farm and started with that herd, and that was my desire. And we were showing cattle, having sales twice a year, and we ended up competing against millionaire breeders that were breeding cattle for tax purposes, and we were breeding them for making income. And it was during that period of time that production testing started. Production testing was when they started to be concerned about how fast an animal was gaining, how long it took them to get to market weight, and diet, etc., and so forth. And there, we were dealing with two types of cattle: the millionaire that was breeding for show and feeding everything that put down fat, and we were breeding for beef. So we weren't trying to get that fat, we were trying to get lean muscle. So it made competition different and tough in the state fair and county fair circuits.
So you go from the farm and you end up in vet school. How long did that take? How long of a period of time was that?
I was doing all of, when I was in school, we had a good course in veterinary medicine in agricultural school. And it was basically a medicine to make a partial diagnosis of something that may be going wrong in your herd. And it wasn't, you weren't dispensing medication and so forth and so on. But in the process of doing that in the herd, I got interested in veterinary medicine because I was doing all the vet work. But I was doing it all under the supervision of a veterinarian. So when I found out that an animal was sick and needed something, if I didn't know, I worked well with a veterinarian, and we had a good relationship. So the VO ag teacher at the high school where we were farming made the comment one day, says, the way you're farming, says, and treating animals, said, you'd make a good veterinarian. I'd never thought about it until he made that comment. I started thinking about it, and it took probably 2 years of thinking and figuring it. And one of the drawbacks of not doing it early is the herd of cattle that we had, Dad had started in 1937. And I didn't want to disperse his herd that had been in existence that long. So I had to think long and hard about selling the herd. And finally I talked to him and says, I want to go back to school, vet school. And he did not disagree, but it did get a wholehearted pat on the back. Good boy. I did for my mother, but not for my dad. But he didn't really object, he just didn't say anything. So we sold out and went back to vet school. And I did not have acceptance. I had to take 2 courses to finish prerequisite for veterinary medicine. And I took them at Ohio University and got through those, got the passing grades, or was waiting for the grades. I knew it was going to be passing. And it was, a month before the semester started, before I had acceptance to vet school.
Oh, wow.
So I'd sold out the machinery, and we'd had a sale on cattle, and our last purebred sale, and I cut all strands behind me, and I didn't have acceptance to vet school. I didn't really think about it until I all of a sudden realized everybody that I had known in those courses that I took was getting their acceptance into vet school and had the acceptance a month or 2 months before I'd heard anything. But I called the vet school and I talked to the dean and asked him about it. He said, well, I don't think you should worry about it. Says, I don't know anybody in the class that has their neck stuck out any farther than you do. So I got my acceptance into vet school.
And how long were you a vet for?
See, I graduated from vet school in '70, and I finally sold my practice in 2002.
2002.
And I did relief work after that.
So, over 30 years.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your story with us and your military service. Thank you for your service.
I'd do it again.